My only hope is you, Jesus. My only hope is you. From early in the morning to late at night, my only hope is you. My only peace is you, Jesus. My only peace is you. From early in the morning till late at night, my only peace is you. My only joy is you, Jesus. My only joy is you. From early in the morning till late at night, my only joy is you. All that I need is you, Jesus. All that I need is you. From early in the morning to late at night, all that I need is you.
Hopefully, we've been worshiping God throughout the week as we get away, read the Word, and pray to God, listen to Him as He speaks to us through His Word and through the insights we gain from His Word. So why are we here? This is a very special time. It's a time when the family of God comes together and we have a greater sense of His presence. Remember that statement Jesus made, where two or three are gathered together in my name, there am I in the midst of them? Well, imagine if you take a whole lot of two or threes together and put them together. He is here in the midst of us. And so we can with accuracy say the presence of God is here. And when we hear each other's voices singing these songs of worship, when we gather around the table of communion, and we're aware of the fact that what we're participating in is an ancient practice, an ancient ritual in a sense, that began when Jesus established this at the Last Supper. And it's to remember Him and to be full of Him. Then it becomes a very special time. So I hope that you're glad you were able to be here today. Because you are the ones who make this the family of God and who invite God to bring His presence here. Imagine if God, in a very literal and miraculous way, made an appearance here. I want to read an occasion when He did do that. It's the prophet Isaiah. He is telling about his personal encounter with God. And he says this in Isaiah 6. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord seated on a throne, high and exalted, and the train of His robe filled the temple. Above Him were seraphs, each with 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces, with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they were flying. And they were calling to one another, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of His glory. Our God is an awesome God. He reigns from heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. Our God is an awesome God. Our God is an awesome God. He reigns from heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. Our God is an awesome God. Our God is an awesome God. He reigns from heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. Our God is an awesome God. Our God is an awesome God. Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty. Early in the morning our song shall rise to Thee. Holy, 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 merciful Shout to the Lord, all the earth, let us sing. Power and majesty, praise to the King. Mountains bow down and the seas will roar at the sound of his name. I sing for joy at the work of your hands. Forever I'll love you, forever I'll stand. Nothing compares to the promise I have in you. My Jesus, my Savior, Lord, there is none like you. All of my days I want to praise the wonders of your mighty love. My comfort, my shelter, tower of refuge and strength, let every breath, all that I am, never cease to worship you. Shout to the Lord, all the earth, let us sing. Power and majesty, praise to the King. Mountains bow down and the seas will roar at the sound of your name. I sing for joy at the work of your hands. Forever I'll love you, forever I'll stand. Nothing compares to the promise I have in. Nothing compares to the promise I have in. Nothing compares to the promise I have in you. Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, all earth shall praise thy name in earth and skies beneath. Holy, 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 merciful and mighty, God in three persons, blessed Trinity. Do you remember the Vulcan greeting? Do you remember that? Can everybody do that? See, not everybody's, obviously you're a Vulcan, Dave. It means live long and prosper. Remember, Spock gave that. And when they say live long, they mean very long, because Vulcans live well over 200 years. A similar greeting that's in Hebrew is shalom, and it means peace and prosperity. Isn't that what all of us want? It sure beats poverty and turmoil, doesn't it? I think God wants us to do well in life too. I think He wishes us prosperity in the most important ways. In fact, I have evidence for that, and we're going to look at this scripture this morning. It's in 3 John, chapter 1, verse 2. When John, writing to apparently a very good friend, he says, "Beloved, I pray that in all respects you may prosper and be in good health, just as your soul prospers." When you run into an old friend that you haven't seen for a while, what do you usually ask? How have you been, right? Has anybody ever asked an old friend, how are your finances these days? Or, how are you doing in your relationship with God? Probably that's not the first thing you said to them. The first one is welcome. First question, how have you been? The second two are in the none of your business category, at least to start with. And yet, how is your soul? How are you doing spiritually? How is your relationship with God? Is really the most important question. And God is concerned about all three of those areas, as we see in 3 John 2. Let's talk about a balance in life. You might call it the prosperity balance that God wants to see in our lives, and how they all affect each other, and what real prosperity means. Some people immediately jump to the conclusion that it means having lots of stuff and lots of cash. But let's see what real prosperity is. Because these three do affect each other: financial, health, spiritual. The stress of financial insecurity, of not knowing how you're going to pay the bills, definitely affects your health. And spiritual poverty will definitely affect both your health and your finances. And sometimes we try to fulfill these things in the wrong means, seeking happiness through money and what money can buy. It puts us on an endless treadmill that goes nowhere. And it leads to things like debt and overspending and obsession with accumulating. And those kind of things take our mind off what can bring us genuine peace. That's why we're going to focus on these things, the right things today. We have control over one of these areas to a fairly great extent. The other two areas we have some influence on, but not as much control. We don't control the country we're born into. And if you're here, then you are one of the blessed in the world. Isn't that true? You don't control the job market or the stability of the company that you work for if you're still working. As far as your health, you don't control the genetic predispositions that your body has that you get from your ancestors. And you don't control some of the things that happen to your body through contamination of things that you eat, or pollutants in the environment, or injuries that you receive at the hand of someone else, or purely by accident. But we do have a choice to put our trust and confidence in God and to pursue a relationship with Him and to accept His grace. So you see, the one area that people neglect the most is the one area that we have the most control over, the most ability to build quality into it. Most everyone wants happiness. And I know you can debate the meaning of the word. It comes from happenstance and so forth. That, there's a difference between happiness and joy. But you know what happiness is, and you want to be happy. Founders of our nation built that into the Declaration of Independence, didn't they? Didn't they say that it was a God-given right to have the pursuit of happiness? And I think what they were meaning was a stability and a lack of turmoil, a peace, and to live in freedom. It also involves peace of mind. It involves enjoyment of your life. It involves having a sense of purpose. And a lot of those things depend on choices that we make. Paul gives Timothy some interesting advice and direction when he writes his first letter to him. And you have to understand what this letter is about. 1st and 2nd Timothy are written to a man who is younger than the Apostle Paul. He is a minister that Paul had recruited into the ministry. Timothy is now in Ephesus as the preacher there. And obviously, some of the stuff in the letters has specifically to do with what's going on in Ephesus. He's giving this young minister trainee that he's got some specific instructions on how to correct some things and what to teach and what to watch out for. But along the way, he gets gives him lots of personal advice, how to build his life, as well as out of the outflow of that, what to teach others. And so he's really talking about this whole concept of prosperity and happiness when he says in 1 Timothy 6, "But godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that." People who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap, and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge men into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. You've heard that before, haven't you? Usually it's quoted, money is the root of all evil. But that's not what he says. He says it is the love of money that is the root of all evil. Some people eager for money have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. Now let's just ponder that for a moment. What would you say the primary theme in this is? What is the key to real peace in life? It's contentment.
Godliness.
Pardon?
Godliness.
Godliness. Godliness with contentment. Yeah, it's not just contentment. It's a pursuit of a relationship with God and a contentment with the physical nature of your life. Now, on the one hand, you might think, well, he's writing to rich people. He's telling them not to hoard money, not to make that the obsession of their life. And he probably is addressing those who have means, like most of us Americans do. But he's also talking to people who have next to nothing, who think, if only I could get this much money, then I would be happy. And he essentially is saying that if you're not happy with where you are now, you won't be happy when you have a lot. In fact, you'll have one more sense of stress, one more cause of stress in your life. And that's why he says, the greatest gain comes from godliness with contentment. And he said, think about it. A baby. Don't you just delight in babies when they smile? They light your life up. How much do babies own? Not a thing. I mean, they literally come into the world with nothing. Now, I don't want to embarrass you, but my understanding is they come into the world without clothes on. Yeah, that's right. And that's what Paul's saying. We came into this world with nothing. And when we leave this world, how much do we get to take with us? Nothing. I know people have made jokes about wearing asbestos clothing and stuff when they leave, but no, it's not going to be that way. And I don't even know if this is true. But I believe, I heard that in the old days, funeral directors would have several sets of suits to dress people in if the family did not have clothes for them. And that the slacks that they had for them had no pockets in them. I don't know if that's true or not, but it was a good story. But think about that. Do you need pockets then? No, you don't. You're taking nothing with you. So all that stuff that means so much now, all that stuff that I had to get an appraisal on so I could increase my insurance on to cover in case of a fire or flood or theft, all that stuff that I anticipate buying, that car that I wash every week and polish and keep really nice, all that stuff, I can't take it with me. I mean, I joke about the fact that I'm going to be buried in my Volkswagen van, but honestly, they're probably not going to want to dig a hole that big enough. So I probably even have to leave that behind. And even if they do bury me in it, it's going to be in the ground, right? It's not really going where I'm going. because they don't cover them with asbestos. No. My hope is in heaven. Just kidding about the other thing. And so, if we don't learn to be content with where we are and what we have, then we're not going to be content when our situation in life changes. That's why he puts that emphasis on godliness with contentment. Look at what he says when he's speaking from personal experience. This is the letter to the Philippians. He's sitting in a Roman jail with an uncertain fate ahead of him. And he says, he's thanking them for coming to his aid when he needed it. And I've mentioned this before, but when you went to jail back in those days, they didn't have standards, nutritional standards, and that the jailers had to feed you so much every day. They provided nothing for you. No clothes, no food. Family had to bring clothing and food for you. And so Paul says, I'm not saying this because I'm in need. For I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I've learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. Do you hear what he says? He says, I've had it all, and I've had nothing. I've had all I needed, and I've had hunger and deprivation. I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. Wow. Is that all there is to it? You learn to grit and bear it. You learn to say, well, it's got to get better than this. Can't get any worse. You learn to say, what's the worst that can happen to me? I'll starve to death, I'll die and go to heaven. That's not all he says here. There's a very famous statement that he says right after this. Look what it is. He says, I can do everything through him who gives me strength. The King James says, I can do all things through Christ which strengtheneth me. You're probably used to hearing it that way. That's the context in which he says that. He's not counseling them to be complacent about their lives. He's not saying it's wrong for them to try to improve their situation, to take care of their family and provide for their family's needs. He's not saying that. He's not saying that it's wrong to move out of poverty and into economic stability. He's not saying that's wrong. In fact, that's a good thing. But the opposite of contentment is the illusion that true success is measured by what you have instead of what you are. Let me say that again. The opposite of contentment with godliness with contentment is the illusion that true happiness, true success, true prosperity is measured by what you have instead of who you are. And if you're under that illusion, then you will become impatient. You will borrow more than you can service. You will gamble with hopes that you're going to make it big. Your heart will turn greedy. You'll try to take advantage of situations. And you will cross the line into dishonesty. That's why he says it leads to destruction. How much is enough? I don't have the answer to that. It's interesting. How much is enough? Well, more than I have now. That's what's enough. Isn't that what most folks feel? Unless you've learned that secret to be content in your circumstances, and you found what real joy and happiness and peace is. You know, the General Motors workers are on strike around the country, and I listen to the Detroit radio station a lot, 760 AM, and middle of the week, there was a news update on the strike, and they interviewed one of the GM workers, and this doesn't tell the whole story, because they've gone on strike to try to, you see, some years ago, after General Motors went through its financial crisis, the contract that was negotiated allowed GM to hire new workers at roughly $10 an hour less than their existing workers. They couldn't get everybody to roll back their wages, so they said, well, how about if we just start now and hire for less, try to lower our costs. And that's what they did, and they've gotten back on their feet. General Motors is doing fairly well right now. And so one thing the strike is about is to try to get those workers up to where the rest of them are. And I say that to try to be fair. I don't want to be biased, pro-union, anti-union, because that doesn't make a point here. But I'm listening to this worker, and they're interviewing this woman. She says, she's on strike. She says, we only get $250 a week, strike pay. She said, I usually make $270 a day. And I thought, okay, it's $90,000 a year. That's something like $33 an hour, plus health benefits, of which they only have to pay 3% of the cost of health benefits. What more could you want? As I say, it's more complicated than that. But she just blurted that right out. I only get $250 a week. I usually make $270 a day. But isn't this where we've come to? I mean, I'm not just pointing a finger at her. It's kind of like, remember that potato chip company that came up with a slogan? You'll remember it. Bet you can't. Oh, yeah. And we all know that that's true, right? I dare you to eat just one potato chip. You can't eat. You can't earn just one. You want another. If I'm getting this much, I want this much. If I have this, well, I want this. I really like my car, and then my neighbor drives in with a really cool car, and I think, oh man, I wish I had that car. Or my neighbor landscapes his yard, and I'm thinking, boy, that looks better than my yard. I need to do that to mine. And this competition goes. And where is contentment? And yet Paul, sitting in jail, says, I've learned to be content with whatever my circumstances. When I'm starving and when my belly's full. When I am secure and have a little cash in my pocket, and when I'm totally broke. Why? I can do everything through Him who gives me strength. And if I can just extrapolate from what Paul is saying, I know what he means by this. Because he talks about it all over the place. Because he knows that he is in the hands and the care of the creator of the universe. He's sitting in jail in rags, starving, and yet he knows he is under the watchful eye and care of his Father in heaven, who loves him so much that he sent his only Son to die for him. And then he took Paul, who had been a murderer of Christians, who were single-handedly trying to destroy the gospel message, and he forgave him. And he lifted him up and he gave him a sacred position of telling the good news to others. And so Paul came from a guy who was pretty arrogant, full of himself, to God, who a guy had literally given it all up and now had the most important job in the world, and that is to tell people about Jesus and his love and sacrifice for them. And Paul's thinking, what do I have to worry about? The sovereign Lord of this universe is on my side. Now, some of us could have been sitting in the jail, hungry in rags, shivering, and said, where is God when I needed him? And Paul's not doing that. He said, man, I am the luckiest guy in the world. I can do everything through Christ who gives me strength. He wasn't standing on top of his Hummer saying, I can do anything, man. He is a lone voice sitting in a jail when he says that. Did this guy have prosperity? I think he did. In the most important way. You see, this whole idea of what do you trust and who do you trust? And where do you get your security? There's a golden thread of this all through the scriptures. One of the later books that was written that has a bit of a mysterious authorship. We're not sure if Apollos or Paul or whoever wrote it. We know it's more like a sermon than it is a letter. And it's powerful. It's the book of Hebrews. But notice how the book of Hebrews wraps itself up. The author says, keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have, because God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. You see how those two things are connected? That godliness with contentment, that sense of peace and security, of knowing that you have enough, that it's going to be all right. It's hearing those words ring from God, I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. The bill comes due, I don't know how I'm going to pay it. He's saying in the distance, I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. The washing machine breaks, you think, oh, do I have to haul all this stuff to the laundromat? And it takes a lot of quarters for that thing. I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. Your child gets sick. Not only do you not have time to deal with it, you don't have money to deal with it. I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. When you get a scary health diagnosis, and you know that this could be the last diagnosis you get, I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. When the worst possible seems to come down the road toward you, I will never leave you. I will never forsake you, he says. Let me wrap this by suggesting that we should take control of what we can take control of in the financial area. Some simple things. These seem so much. Stay married, first of all. Do you know what? The greatest cause of poverty in women is divorce. It's true. The numbers show it. Stay married, get out of debt, become allergic to debt. I know some of us have had to use borrowing along the way as quickly as you can, in an organized fashion. Get out of debt. If you can't use the credit card in a way that you pay it off when the bill comes, then cut it up and get rid of it. Get out of debt. Save. Very often we think, well, I can't save enough to make any difference. That's not the way it works. You save a little bit, and it gradually accumulates. And then that little bit that you've saved, it starts multiplying because you get interest on the interest. And over time you have more than you expected. And you build a habit. And then there's something about a savings account that you think, well, I don't want to go into that. You know, I've got this emergency rainy day fund savings account, and then an emergency comes, you think, oh man, there's some other way I can do it without getting into that, because I don't want to get into that savings account. I'm afraid once I start it'll go. It does something to you. It starts making you a saver instead of a borrower. And live within your means. One of my favorite professors in college was a grand man named Basil Overton. I mean, even that name. Isn't that a great name? Basil Overton. And he had this wonderful baritone voice. I can still hear him. And he'd say to us, young families, he'd say, when your outgo exceeds your income, your upkeep becomes your downfall. That was 40 plus years ago. That was 45 years ago that I heard that from him. And I still remember that. And you know what? It has always been true. And so, if you do that, you save and wait. Instead of saying, well, we need this and this and this. Let's rent this and this and this, or let's borrow for this and this and this. Do you need it or do you want it? I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands, but if I asked you to raise your hands, how many of you started out on a used threadbare couch and on a bunch of mismatched lamps and end tables that you couldn't wait to get rid of and buy new ones, but it took a few years before you could? I'd probably have a lot of hands go up. But what if you were raised to believe that you deserve the best right out of the gate? That you shouldn't have to use other people's castaways? You're asking for trouble. So if I go into your home and I see old, worn, used stuff, it just brings joy to my heart. I feel like I'm home. You know, through the years, piece by piece, we've replaced the junk with something a little better, although probably some of the stuff we gave to Goodwill, if American Pickers ever came by, they'd offer me $5,000 for it, and I got rid of it. Anyways, wait. Go buy your stuff at the Habitat for Humanity store. Go to Goodwill and find your stuff. It's not going to hurt you. Don't be embarrassed about inviting people over and having your furniture like that. That's a badge of wisdom. You know what? This doesn't change throughout life because there are other things you can do. Buy on sale. Start shopping for Christmas in January when the clearance sales are going on. If the finances are close, eat at home. Take advantage of all the inexpensive things families can do. And there are lots. Ask me. I remember, well, Karen knows this. When we were kids, I think once a year, I got to go out to dinner. It was the day of the mother-daughter banquet at Lakeview EUB Church. And Mom and my 4 sisters would go to the banquet. And so it was just Dad and me, and we weren't about to cook for ourselves. So we would go to a restaurant one time a year. Now, the other big times of going out to eat out were when we'd pack everybody in the car and go over to McDonald's over in Saybrook. You could get 10 or 12 cent hamburgers then. That was a big deal for us, eating burgers in the car. You know, it really distorted our lives, didn't it, Karen? And our big vacations, Dad would cobble some stuff together for camping, and we go camping together. Cook's Forest, Pennsylvania Grand Canyon, Pymatuning, some of our favorite places. And so a few years ago, some of my sisters got talking and said, you know what? We should start doing that again. So every Memorial Day, we go camping together. and we remember some memories. We had a great time. I had such great memories of that. We never stayed in a 5-star hotel. We never stayed in a 1-star hotel. We had a tent. We had a car that Dad had modified so the seats would fold down. And then he bought a teardrop camper as the family started growing. And as the family grew, we added some things to it. And had a great time together. How about health? You know what? Simple things like eat good food, move. I'm not talking about move from one community to another. I'm just saying move. That's the benefit of the Fitbit things that all these people are wearing. Brenda's got one of those Fitbits that a nephew gave her. And there are about 4 or 5 of our nephews and nieces. They've all got these, and they've got the reports on it linked together, so they compete with each other each week. And Brenda always comes in either first or second. It's a big deal. And we'll be going for a walk in the evening, and she'll say, "Oh, I just reached my goal." Because it vibrated. I got my 7,000 steps in or something. There's motivation in that. Just move. A long time ago I made a practice that if I'm in a public building and I can find the stairwell, I'll use the stairs instead of the elevators. If it's 20 floors, that's a different matter. I don't want to get to the meeting all sweaty. But I'll take the stairs instead of the elevator. Am I afraid of elevators? No, not at all. But the stairs force me to move. And I do enough not moving, I need to move. Go out and take a walk. It's beautiful weather for walking. Sometimes it's a little difficult to walk. You don't have to walk miles and miles. You don't have to walk fast. Just move. I'm not going to lecture you on what to eat because the opinions change on it all the time. In my lifetime, eggs have been good and they were bad, and they were good and they were bad. I think they're good again, although some are questioning whether they're still good. So I'm going to eat them. I'm going to eat other things as well. But just as a rule, the fresher the food, the better it is for you. The more it's pre-processed, the worse it is for you. So if you're in the practice of everything you eat, you open a can or a box, you might want to take a look at that. There's some fabulous recipes. That might be a good fun thing to do is next Sunday we're having a potluck luncheon. So if you've got a great recipe, fix it for that and bring a copy of the recipe, especially if it has fresh ingredients. One of our favorite dishes is one that Missy pushed on us. She worked for the National Institutes of Health, the National Cancer Institute Division, in communications and marketing. And so she gave us this book on healthy foods. And we tried a recipe out of that, fell in love with it, and we have it at least every month. I would eat it every day, but Brenda is one of those old-fashioned people that doesn't think you should have the same food every single day. So we don't have it every day, but I could eat it every day. And it's made out of fresh stuff, and it's got chicken in it, and it's really good. But those kind of things, share them. On top of that, we've got these, a weird son and a weird granddaughter who decided not to eat meat. And so instead of getting grumpy about that, we decided to look for vegetarian meal items that we could fix when they come. And so we found some stuff that we like better than what we had been eating. So now we put some vegetarian stuff in our menu, not because we don't believe in eating meat, because we really do believe in eating meat. It's a religious matter to me. I think it's godliness involves eating animals. I think it says someplace in Scripture. You know what? When I say things like that, you better get your Bible out and read the whole thing through. And just see if you can find that. Because I might not be speaking accurately. Okay? But, there's certain things to keep away from. The vaping phenomenon, boy, there's some problems. Nicotine is nicotine. And by the way, speaking of nicotine, I have two good friends who, in the last 2 years, got throat and mouth cancer from tobacco. And one of them died. And both of them went through horrific surgeries to try to save them and correct it. Some things keep away from. But the final one, the most important one, the soul prosperity, the spiritual area of your life. I started by saying we have more control of this one than the other ones. And if this one is working in our lives, the other two will tend to fall in place. We'll have respect for our body. We'll feel better about ourselves and about our life. We will be under less stress. We will not try to replace God with things. And so it just makes a better life. And so, some things we can do to help nurture that spiritual growth in ourselves. Be here. When God says, come, ecclesia, the called out, come. That's what he does every Sunday. And other times that we gather, he says, come, church, come. Listen to God. Read his word. Talk to him. You can have a two-way conversation with God. You read his word, you listen to him, you say, whoa, what is this? What do you want me to do about this, Lord? You'll figure that out if you start asking that question of him. Spend less time with the news and more time with the good news. Make connections with people who will build you up spiritually. And I'm not saying that all of your time with those people is having theological discussions. Frankly, if it's that, it would get real boring, real fast, and it would be weird. But be with people who are fun to be with, who are pursuing a relationship with God like you are. And you'll find you're going on a parallel track, and they will model for you and you will model for them how to do it right. And generally, every one of us has to deal with toxic people in our lives. But don't let them poison you. You set the limits. Make sure that you're not the toxic person, first of all, who is harming those around you. But if you have to deal with them, you set the limits for contact. And you require that they deal with you with respect. Respect yourself enough as a child of God to ask others to respect you. And if they defy that, if they refuse, then you distance yourself from them. They need correction, loving correction. But if you put up with it, you're just giving them permission. And so, it's not easy. I know it's not easy. And it gets more complicated than just what I can say on Sunday morning. But don't let them poison you. You see, your Father in heaven cares about every part of you. In fact, this is so spoken again. I'm going to close on this. It's 1 Thessalonians 5:23. It's a benediction that Paul gives on this church as he's closing this letter out. And he says, may God himself, the God of peace, sanctify you. That means make you holy, set you apart for himself. Through and through. May your whole spirit, soul, and body be kept sound and blameless at the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. He wants you to be healthy and holy all the way through every aspect of you. Your emotional life, your physical life, your life with dealing with everyday responsibilities. He wants all of you to be blessed and set apart for Him, because He loves you.
Years I spent in vanity and pride, caring not my Lord was crucified, knowing not it was for me He died on Calvary. Mercy there was great, and grace was free.